Welcome back. This is the third and final video for the Platformer Lab, and today we'll be discussing the HUD. So in the previous two videos we talked about pickups, so here are some of the pickups we created, as well as platforms, which we created this elevator BP platform. And then the third part was the HUD, which is what we're going to work on today. And so you actually don't need to have watched the Platform Lab, or the platform video for this, but we are going to be building on the pickups. For the last piece of it, where we're integrating it. So for the first part, we're just going to be building the HUD, and then for the end part, we're going to integrate these pickups with the HUD. So ultimately, we want it to show up on the screen when our health changes, and also when our score changes. And so these are the pickups we have. If you recall from the previous video, we've got a pickup parent class, has three child classes, coin, bomb, and health, and then all these contain a static mesh and a collision sphere, and then the coin BP modifies the score, bomb BP and health BP modify health. So just to kind of think about what we want this to look like, find some space here. We want to have kind of our screen, our viewport. It's called the viewport in the Unreal Engine. So this is our kind of rough rectangle of what the player will see on the screen, and then we want an overlay that shows the player's health and the score. And so we'll have like a little text box here that says score, and then it'll have some number based on how many coins they picked up. And then we want another text box that says health. And for this one, we'll use what's called a progress bar, and that's just like a bar that you can fill in by some percentage. So that percentage will be based on health. And if you recall back to the, and we'll see this in a minute, but if you recall back to the pickup lab, we're setting the health to a value between 0 and 1. The reason we were doing that is because the progress bar on the UI is a value, it's a percentage, so it's a value between 0 and 1. So it'll be like 0.1, 0.3, 0.75, something like that. And so depending on what that value is set to, will show how filled this progress bar is. So this is all we're going to be doing today. We're going to set up this. So there's actually two parts to this. We need to create a widget, and a widget is just a modular UI component, and so that widget is going to contain everything here that we're going to put on the screen on top of the screen, and then we need to add it to the viewport. This we'll do in the level blueprint. And then we'll have a little bit of code that basically binds these values, the value of the progress bar and the value of the score, to the values in the third person character that we have created. So another thing we created in the pickup lab, so let me write that a little bit better. In the pickup lab we created a score variable and a health variable, and I'll show those in a second. And so we're going to bind those to these UI values, and I'll show you how to do that. So go back to Unreal Engine. So right now when we play, we've got our character moving around on the screen, we've got the environment, but we don't have anything else on the screen. And so a lot of times in games you'll have like a HUD, which will show some user interface information, like you might have your time remaining in the level, your score, your health, sometimes things like ammo, how many enemies are left, all kinds of things, but we'll just put them up here on the top left. So the first thing we need to do that is create a new widget. And so I'm going to go down here, create user interface widget blueprint, and I'll just call this HUD underscore BP. And open that up, snap it in here, and then zoom in a little bit. So this is going to fill our entire screen. So this rectangle is kind of showing what the viewport looks like, and it will scale with our user's viewport. So if they have a different resolution set, that will scale. But what we want is for our health, our score and our health, to be in this top left corner. So we could arrange these in a box to be like clean, but for now I'm just going, to make it easy, I'm just going to make these, I'm just going to drop these on here. So we need 3 text blocks, and we'll just kind of place them freehand. We don't have to line it up perfectly. I'm actually going to lower this one a little bit, and then I can duplicate that with a Control or a Shift D. Actually, it's not duplicating. I'll just grab another one here, and kind of we'll line these up better once we have some text in it. And then a third one down here, and this is going to be for our health. And then lastly, we need a progress bar. And this is actually going to display our health. And I'm going to make this kind of long there so it's easier to see. Okay, for this first one, this is just going to be the score. So I'll do score and then a colon. And maybe I'll increase the size a little bit, just so it's a little easier to see, so I can type size up here and change the font size to about 30. Let's just do that with all of these. And then it doesn't really matter what the name of this text block actually is, so it's just going to be text block 0 because we're not going to be modifying that in code. Similarly, we're going to have this one say health. And then I'm going to line this health progress bar up and this text block. So this text block is going to, we're going to want to change this in code because we want that to show the actual score value, and by default I'm going to set that to 0 so we can see what it looks like. Let me move it a little bit closer here. And so it will kind of, the higher our score goes, it'll grow to the right here. And then for our progress bar, what we can do is set a default value so we can kind of see the progress. So I'm going to, instead of this putting this at 0, I'm going to put it at 0.75 just to see what that looks like. But we're actually, in code, we're going to bind this to the actual player's health. So it'll decrease and increase based on whether we run over those pickups. So we've got our basic widget, so I'm compiling and saving. We are going to have to add some code here, but for now I'm just going to add this to the viewport so we can see it in the game. So again, we don't have anything, we don't have it up there yet, but we need to create it and add it to the viewport. So I'm going to go to blueprints and open level blueprint, and this will take me to the event graph of my level blueprint. And now I'm just going to right click and do begin play, because I want this to be added as soon as we start playing. So to do that, we do create widget, and so this allows us to create one of the widgets that we've created. It's going to create the actual instance of the widget. I'm going to select HUD BP, which is the one we just created. And then for owning player, I'm going to find the player controller using get player controller 0. So since this is a single player game, it's just going to be 0. So after we have created the widget, we need to add it to the viewport. So I just connect this return value and execution pins, and now compile and save. And so now if I hit play, voila, we've got our score and our health in the top left. Now these don't actually work yet because we don't have the values bound. So we've got explosions happening. We still have our test text in there. So if you notice kind of that teal overlay, 20 there, 25, that's what our score is going to be when we hit those coins, but right now it's just printing that text to the screen. So next step is to bind these values, because we know the value is updating correctly on the third person character because we're seeing those printouts on the top left, but we want to update our HUD that we just created. So I'm going to open back up our HUD blueprint, and now for this value, our score, we are going to name this to something that we can remember in code. So I'm going to type score text. And then similarly for our progress bar, since we're going to be modifying that in code, I'm going to name that to health bar. Alright, so we need to bind these. So if I click on that, if I find the text content, I'm going to click bind and create a binding. And so that will switch me to the graph view and create this function where it says get score text and a return node. And the return node is what needs to be passed. I need to pass in the value that I want to set it to. So for the score text, it's pretty simple. I'm going to move my return node to give me a little bit of space here. And since I want to get, I'm going to go to my third person blueprint here. If you don't have that open, you can scroll down to where your third person character is here and click this edit third person blueprint. That'll open up this blueprint. And if you remember, we did not create these functions, but we did add these variables. We added the health, which we set as a default value of 1.0, and a score, which is a integer that we set to a default value of 0. So we want to get these values in our HUD. And I'll tell you right now, there is a more efficient way to do this so that we only kind of look up these values when we need to, like when we're changing the score. But for now, we're just going to actually look it up each frame. So every frame, this is going to run and check see if the score has changed. So we need to get an instance of our player. So we'll get the player character, and then we want to cast this to a third-person character, because third-person character has our variables that we need to access. And I'll connect these execution pins. And so if the cast succeeds, I want to get the score. So this is that variable that we are modifying on our third-person character. And just to kind of review a little bit, if we look at our pickup BP, we created these two functions, the modify score and the modify health, which are very similar, but what they basically do is they take the amount that we want to modify and then they add it to this third-person character score, or health in the case of health. And then for now, we're actually printing this stuff to the screen, but we're not gonna need to do this after we set up our HUD, because our values are going to be shown on the display instead of printed out. So we can actually go ahead and delete these. So I'm going to delete my print string on modify score and on modify health. I'm also going to delete the print string. Compile and save that. So I'm not changing any of the functionality other than the printout at the end. So back in our HUD BP, the only thing we need to do here is if we just connect this score to the return value, it'll insert this cast here that automatically changes our float value, or our integer value, to a text value. So we can actually find out if that's working by going back to our designer. If we set our score to something like 796 and save that, we would expect this 796 to show up unless the bind is working. If the bind is working, then it should be set to 0, which it is, because it's, instead of printing that 796, it's actually running this code and getting the third person character and finding the score and setting that to the return node value. So we can actually test this out to see if our score is changing. So if you look, we have our score of 0, and then if we run over a coin, see our score immediately changes to 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So our score is updating correctly. So next we want to change the value of this health bar. So if we go back to our designer, we've got our health bar. By default we set it to 0.75, which we actually want to bind this to our health value. So this is going to be almost exactly the same as binding the score. So we do create binding. It switches us to the graph view and gives us this function, creates a function called getHealthBar%. And for that one, we're going to do, like I said, almost the exact same thing. We need to get an instance of our player. So get player character, and then cast it to a third person controller, or third person character. Attach these execution pins. And now instead of getting the score, we're going to get the health. And it's important, there's no cast happening here. We want, because the return node for the progress bar needs a float. And so that's a decimal value. And in this case, it's between 0 and 1. And so that's exactly what our health is. And so we just attach that. And this, if this bind is working correctly, instead of being at 75%, it should start at 100%. And it does. So now we have our health working. And then if we run over a bomb, you can see our health decreases. I think that's by 30% maybe each bomb. So we can see we're almost dead, and then we have these health packs that regenerate our health. So that's really all there is to it. And if you can think about anything that you want to do with anything you want to display on the screen, player information that you want your player to know, like I said, ammo, or maybe time remaining in the level, you can use a HUD for that. And so you can either add it to this HUD that we created with the score and the health, or you can create another widget and add that one to the viewport. And then the main thing to remember is, in our level blueprint, we just need to create the widget and add it to the viewport. Let me just check my notes to see if there's anything I missed, but I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, so that's it for this section. Perhaps in a future section we'll show you a more efficient way to update this. So in our HUD, like I said, in our functions here, we're reading this value from the third person character every single frame, which could happen like 60 times per second even. And that's pretty inefficient. There's a better way to do it with something called events and messaging, but this is a really easy way to do it, and it works for our case. So that's it. See you in the next video.